Shutter angle is finally coming to the Sony FX3. But there's one catch. You're gonna have to wait till September. What does that mean? Now you may have heard that Sony have announced two updates for the Sony FX6 and of course the Sony FX3. These are relatively minor updates. There's a few nice additions for both cameras in there, but we're going to focus on the FX3 and the all-important addition of shutter angle. Well, if you don't know what shutter angle is and why it's so useful, it's just simply the ability to set your shutter speed at twice whatever the frame rate is to give you the correct motion blur when you are shooting. So if you're shooting at 25 frames per second, for example, it will set it at 1/50th. And if you go to 50 frames, it will go up to 100th. Now, it's not a major deal to have to manually set it each time as you switch between frame rates. It really isn't the end of the world, but it certainly can be a bit frustrating, and it's certainly a missing feature of a cinema camera. When you look at across all the other brands and their cinema cameras, they all have shutter angle included, and really a cinema camera like the FX3, it should have it on there as well. Ever since the FX3 got released, everyone has been begging Sony to add shutter angle. It seemed like a really simple thing to add. After all, it's just a bit of code, surely, in how it reads the data of the shutter speed. Maybe I'm oversimplifying things. After all, I'm no camera engineer, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there saying it's much more complicated than that. However, we have seen Sony release many updates for the FX3 over the last several years that have been awesome and far more complicated, I would have thought, than adding shutter angle. So the question has to be, why now? Why is Sony now adding shutter angle to their camera, and why do we have to wait till September? There have been rumours of a Sony FX3 Mark II coming out soon. Some people have been talking about potentially coming out in March, and to be fair, it sort of makes sense in terms of timing of all the camera releases and the product cycles of Sony cameras. However, I think this announcement might speak to the fact that the FX3 Mark II will be coming out a bit later in the year. I've got a feeling from looking at this that Sony are giving us this to kind of make us hold on to the Sony ecosystem and wait for the Mark II before we give up and move to somewhere else. Realistically, I think we will see the Sony FX3 Mark II before we see the release of this shutter angle. And I think that's probably why they've decided to push it back till September, to push it far enough away that you kind of then get tempted to go for the newer camera when it gets announced, but also at the same time holding off from going for any other brand in the meantime. Speaking of those other brands, and well, there's definitely been rumours spreading around about the next Canon cameras coming out and the next Panasonic ones. Canon have obviously got the R1 this year coming out, and that could be a great video camera potentially. More importantly, there are rumours of a Panasonic S1H Mark II being very close to release. Now, we've seen how great the S5 II is, and how now with autofocus and all the video-centric features that camera has, a big brother version of this camera could be a true competitor to the Sony FX3. I do wonder if cameras like that are going to be coming out very, very soon, sometime in the next few months, and maybe Sony have caught wind of that and are a bit concerned that people are going to be very tempted to switch before they get a chance to release the FX3 Mark II. To be honest, I think announcing this update to the FX3 right now is just a way of keeping people in the ecosystem and stop them from looking elsewhere when all these other amazing cameras get announced. The question though, is that enough? Is that enough for you to stick to Sony? Are you going to wait for shutter angle, or are you desperate for a new updated FX3? I know there's plenty of other features more important than shutter angle that I'd love to see in the Sony FX3, and in fact I've got a video coming very soon, which might already be up, that you want to check out, talking about the 10 features that I think the FX3 Mark II desperately needs.